When I was born in 1970, Rhodesia existed. Today it does not exist. Instead, Zimbabwe exists in its place, and the people we think of as Rhodesians, the whites of Rhodesia, mostly do not live in Zimbabwe, and many do not even call themselves Rhodesian anymore. But why should that be? Now many wonder, why should a country that had fought long and bravely for its independence no longer exist? Rhodesia had many advantages. It produced so much food, it was called the breadbasket of Africa. It was a democracy, a limited democracy, as only whites could vote. It had a small but very good military, and the white population was very loyal. To understand, let's first have a look at their history. In the 1880s, the British Empire was seeking to control as much of Africa as it possibly could. It wanted a continuous line of territories, often known as Cairo to Cape Town. In the early 1890s, Cecil Rhodes, the richest man in southern Africa, had the tribes of the area sign a treaty giving up mineral rights. The tribes were happy to get what seemed like money for nothing. But of course, mining requires more than just mines. It requires miners, and they require food and entertainment and accommodation. Minerals need to be transported, and at that time it was by railway, and all of this needs to be administered and policed. The tribes tried to stop this by attacking the few whites in the area. This seemingly unprovoked attack created a lot of bad blood on the part of the whites. The military defeat of the tribes within months of their starting what they called the Chimurenga created a lot of bad blood on the African side. By 1900, after a second war, Rhodesia as a country was now known was part of the British Empire, and Africans lost nearly all political power. In 1895, an employee of Cecil Rhodes, Dr. Jameson, led a raid into the then independent Republic of the Transvaal. The raid was a disaster, and President Kruger of the Transvaal was very generous and sent them back without punishment. In 1899, war broke out between the British Empire and the two Boer republics in South Africa. Rhodesia was solidly behind the British Empire. The war was bloody, and for the Boers, now known as Afrikaners, the war ended in defeat and the destruction of their republics. In 1910, the Union of South Africa was created, uniting British colonies with the former Boer republics together into one country. In 1923, Rhodesia had been divided into Northern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and Southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, was asked in a referendum if it wanted to become a self-governing colony within the British Empire or whether it wanted to join the Union of South Africa. It chose to be self-governing. In the late 1950s, it was decided that the British colonies within Africa would be given independence. In Rhodesia, this created a problem, as the whites who governed the country did not want to be controlled by the much larger African population. They argued that the Africans had neither the skills or the ability to govern the country, and that to give power to the majority African population was irresponsible. The period until 1965 was one of the British government trying to get white Rhodesians to agree to give power to a majority African population, and the white Rhodesians saying no. In 1965, Rhodesia broke away and declared itself independent, UDI as it was known, the Unilateral Declaration of Independence. In international law, this didn't make Rhodesia independent, but a territory in rebellion. The British tried to negotiate with the Rhodesians, but to no avail. In 1970, Rhodesia declared itself a republic. From this point on, the security situation, which had been unstable, started to get very bad. Each year got worse, and finally in 1979, Rhodesia signed the Lancaster House Agreement, which created Zimbabwe. I believe that there are three primary reasons why Rhodesia failed: geography, internal politics, and external politics. Geography. Rhodesia was landlocked. This presents enormous economic and security problems. As a general rule, it's cheaper to transport goods in this order: by sea, by rail, by road, by air. Straight away, one of those is denied to Rhodesia as it has no port. Rhodesia must have good relations with as many of its neighbours as it possibly can, just to stay economically viable. If it does not, then the rail and road transport links are in danger. If they are cut, then only air transport remains. It means that Rhodesia has a major problem in both importing goods such as oil and in exporting its agricultural products. Security-wise, being landlocked is also bad. Having a coastline means that you can project power and that it is possible to stop maritime attacks or infiltration easier. Not 100%, but still easier. Land borders are porous, as often borders are lines on a map and not geographical features such as a mountain range or rivers. Zambia and Rhodesia had the Zambezi River as a border, but between Mozambique and Rhodesia there was next to no physical barriers. Internal politics. White Rhodesians feared majority African rule, one man, one vote, but in reality they denied any real political solution to the problem because they didn't even allow 100 men, one vote. Africans were nearly completely denied political power or representation. White Rhodesians were, it's true, good administrators, but when an entire people cannot have a say in how they are governed, it creates problems. If an intelligent or ambitious young man sees he can never have political power, what is he to do? Should he just give up, or should he strive to achieve that power? And if it's still denied to him, then what option does he have except to fight? If one side says, join us and we will give you power, and the other says, join us and you'll never have political power, who would you join? I'm not saying Rhodesia needed to have one man, one vote, but it needed something better than all Africans, no vote. In 1977, Rhodesia sought an internal agreement, which it got from moderate African leaders. The government then sought to undermine its own agreement because in reality it didn't want anything to change at all. This destroyed the internal agreement, discredited the moderate African leadership, and destroyed its own credibility with loyal Africans. It also meant that only the extreme leaders remained, so when a final agreement was signed, it was with them. External politics. When Rhodesia declared UDI in 1965, it had natural allies in southern Africa, South Africa and the Portuguese Empire, which still controlled Angola and Mozambique. But over time it was to lose even these allies, and by 1979 it was effectively friendless. But let's step back and look at this in stages. 1965 to 70. Only Zambia is hostile, and it needs Rhodesia economically. So while it says nasty things about Rhodesia, in reality it's only mildly hostile, even though it allows guerrillas to operate from its territory. Britain has announced sanctions against Rhodesia and has naval ships enforcing it, but it's only of limited effectiveness. Many countries quietly support Rhodesia. Even Eastern Bloc communist countries trade without issue. 1970 to 75. The African states in southern Africa that face Rhodesia and South Africa are now called the frontline states. They are receiving much needed support economically, militarily and politically. They are encouraged to stand up to Rhodesia, and because of the support they are now receiving, they do, with much backsliding at times. The wars in Angola and Mozambique are getting harder for the Portuguese. More men, money and resources are needed to continue fighting, and the guerrillas are receiving much needed aid from the communist bloc. At the same time, South Africa is starting to be put under a lot of pressure to cut Rhodesia loose. 1975 to 80. In 1974 there is a military coup in Portugal, and Angola and Mozambique are given their independence. The economic and security problems start to get very big now. In 1977 South Africa cuts Rhodesia loose. To many people this seems strange, as they seem to be two peas in a pod, but in reality neither Rhodesia nor South Africa really understood the other. Rhodesia believes that South Africa will stand by it no matter what, but that isn't true. South Africa resents Rhodesia, as the Afrikaners who ran southern Africa think of Rhodesia as a leftover piece of the hated British Empire. The British Empire attacked them and destroyed their republics, told them how to live and killed many during the War of 1899-1902. They had no love for Rhodesia, particularly as Rhodesians had rejected South Africa in 1923 when it was given the chance to join. By 1979, Rhodesia had no friends. It had trouble trading, it couldn't maintain its military force, and it had enemies near and far. Rhodesia failed because it could no longer pretend that it lived in its own world. The rest of the world had opinions about how Rhodesia should be governed, and whether it was right or wrong, its opinion could no longer be ignored. The future was supposed to be brighter, but it wasn't. for all the problems of Rhodesia, its successor state Zimbabwe was to truly fail. But that's for tomorrow.